In the shadows of Tennessee's dense forests, whispers told of two sisters whose beauty was only matched by the darkness in their hearts. Locals called them the Hollowborn sisters, and while they appeared gentle in daylight, rumors spoke of secret gatherings under the moon, where men who dared to cross their path vanished into a world of forbidden pleasure and unspeakable acts. No one knew why, or how, the sisters lured their victims, but every encounter left men both enthralled and broken, as if the forest itself had claimed them. Strange symbols carved into the trees, silvery whispers carried on the wind, and the lingering scent of decay haunted anyone who dared venture near their isolated homestead. Some swore they saw the sisters moving unnaturally like shadows with human faces, orchestrating desires that no man could resist. This story is purely fictional. Names, places, and events are imagined for storytelling purposes only. Chapter 1. The Sisters of Hollowborn Hollow. Welcome back. In the waning light of 1891 Tennessee, the Hollowborn sisters' home sat at the edge of a dense, whispering forest. To the outside world, it was a quaint, timber-framed house surrounded by untamed fields, yet locals avoided it, convinced something unnatural thrived within its walls. The sisters, Maribel and Celine, moved with a grace that seemed almost predatory. Children who glimpsed them from afar would scurry home, murmuring tales of eyes that gleamed with secrets no one should know. Maribel, the elder, spoke softly, almost hypnotically, while Celine's laughter carried a musical yet unnerving quality, echoing across the forest at night. Men who arrived on business or through mere curiosity often left enchanted, never revealing the lure that had pulled them in. Their presence alone distorted the air, hints of jasmine and something more sinister, a scent that both invited and warned. It was the fall harvest when Jacob Everett, a young farmer, first saw them gathering herbs in the clearing. He noticed the unnatural stillness of the forest, the way the birds seemed to vanish as they approached. Maribel's glance caught his, soft yet commanding, and Celine's smile promised pleasures that defied reason. Something in him knew danger, yet he could not turn away. Within days, the men of Hollowborn Hollow whispered of disappearances. Tools were left unfinished in fields, horses wandered free, and the sisters' laughter haunted the twilight. Some said it was enchantment, others claimed madness. But no one could explain the allure that drew men like Jacob closer. Maribel and Celine were patient predators, waiting for the right moment to reveal the darkness hidden beneath their beauty. Nights were long and full of secrets, each one a slow unraveling of desire and terror. The forest seemed to pulse with their wit, bending men's fates toward a shadow they could not resist. Next, we discover how Jacob becomes entangled in the Hollowborn sisters' web, and the forest reveals its first terrifying secret. Chapter 2. Jacob's Dangerous Curiosity. Jacob Everett could not shake the image of the Hollowborn sisters from his mind. Each morning, the memory of Maribel's steady gaze and Celine's haunting laughter tugged at him, drawing him toward the forest as if some invisible thread had tied him to their world. The villagers whispered warnings, tales of men who had vanished, never to be seen again, but curiosity gnawed at him more fiercely than fear. One crisp morning, Jacob ventured closer to the clearing where the sisters gathered herbs. The forest seemed alive, shadows bending unnaturally around the trees, as if guiding him toward a destiny he did not yet understand. When he emerged into the open, Maribel and Celine were waiting, standing side by side, bathed in a pale, golden light. They said nothing, merely observing him with those eyes that promised both warmth and danger. Celine stepped forward first, her fingers brushing against a fern in a way that seemed almost ceremonial. Maribel followed, speaking softly of the plant's uses for healing and more, unspoken pleasures that hung between the words. Jacob's mind struggled to resist, yet every fiber of his being urged him to stay. The air seemed to thicken, drawing him into a rhythm he could not escape. Hours passed like minutes. Birds had vanished. Even the wind seemed hushed. Jacob realized he could not leave, not entirely, not without knowing what secrets the sisters held. And then, a strange sensation crept over him. The forest itself seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, shadows stretching toward him, guiding his steps closer to the house. Maribel finally spoke. her voice a whisper meant only for him. "Once you cross this threshold, nothing will be the same," she warned. Yet her eyes, Celine's too, beckoned him forward. A part of him wanted to run, another part trembled with anticipation. The sisters' pout. It was subtle, yet absolute, a gentle but insistent pull that erased rational thought. By twilight, Jacob found himself standing on the doorstep of the Hollowborn house, the forest behind him seeming to dissolve into mist. The door opened without a sound, and he stepped inside, drawn by a mixture of dread and desire he could not name. Inside, the air was warmer, scented faintly of herbs, and something darker, almost metallic, that made his pulse quicken. Jacob had crossed the first threshold, yet he had no idea what awaited him beyond the walls. Each step felt like surrender, but the pull of the sisters' gaze promised experiences he could never imagine, and dangers he could never escape. Next, we discover the sisters' private world inside the Hollowborn home and the strange rituals that begin to ensnare Jacob. Chapter 3. The Hollowborn House of Shadows. The moment Jacob crossed the threshold, he felt the air change. The Hollowborn house was unlike any home he had known. Its wooden floors creaked beneath his feet, though the sound seemed muted, as if absorbed by the walls themselves. Candles flickered in sconces carved with unfamiliar symbols, casting shadows that danced like silent witnesses to secrets better left unspoken. Maribel guided him deeper into the house, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. Celine followed closely, her laughter low and melodic, echoing softly in the corridors. Jacob noticed that every object, furniture, tapestries, even the air itself, seemed deliberately arranged, forming patterns he could not decipher. The sisters moved with fluid grace, performing small, deliberate actions, adjusting a candle, folding a cloth, tracing lines in the dust. Every gesture was hypnotic, drawing Jacob's attention and warping his sense of time. He was led to a parlor filled with strange relics, jars of herbs and dried flowers, faded portraits of unknown figures, and books whose leather covers seemed almost alive, writhing beneath his gaze. The sisters did not speak much, yet every glance carried weight, hinting at knowledge that surpassed human understanding. A low hum seemed to rise from the floorboards, vibrating in Jacob's chest and mingling with the rhythmic beating of his own heart. Celine poured a dark liquid into 2 small cups, offering one to Jacob. Its aroma was heady, floral, yet oddly metallic. Maribel spoke, her voice soft and compelling. "Drink, and see what has always been hidden from the eyes of the ordinary." Hesitation clawed at him, but the pull of the sisters' will was irresistible. One sip, and the world shifted. The walls seemed to breathe, shadows twisting into shapes that hinted at desires and terrors Jacob had never known the sister. Are's power was subtle, yet overwhelming. They did not force him. They simply allowed the forest, the house, and themselves to enfold him in a reality that was at once beautiful and terrifying. Jacob felt both fear and fascination, a duality that left him unsteady. Every detail, the faint rustle of wings in the attic, the smell of damp earth seeping from the walls, the soft sighs of the sisters, built a tension that made it impossible to think clearly. As night fell, the Hollowborn house seemed to pulse with life, shadows stretching long and thin across the floors. Jacob realized he was no longer a visitor. He had entered a threshold he might never leave. The sisters' influence seeped into his mind, promising pleasures, secrets, and dangers in equal measure. Every instinct urged him to flee, yet every fiber of his being yearned to stay. Next, we discover the first of the sisters' twisted rituals and the way Jacob begins to unravel under their influence. Chapter 4. The Sisters' Midnight Ritual. Night had fully descended over Hollowborn Hollow, and the house seemed to breathe with secrets. Jacob could feel it. The floorboards pulsed underfoot, shadows curling and stretching like living tendrils around him. Maribel and Celine moved with a fluid grace, almost spectral, guiding him toward a back chamber he had never noticed before. The door opened to reveal a room bathed in the silver glow of the moon through a high, narrow window. Candles flickered along the walls, illuminating symbols etched into the floor in what appeared to be ash and dried petals. Maribel's voice, soft yet commanding, broke the silence. "Tonight, "You will see the truths hidden from ordinary eyes," she said. Celine stepped forward, carrying a small, intricately carved box. She opened it, revealing items that sent a chill down Jacob's spine. Feathers, strange powders, and what looked disturbingly like personal belongings of men he had heard whispers about in the village. Jacob's pulse quickened. He had come here seeking curiosity, but now a fear unlike any he had felt gripped him. The sisters did not act with malice. They were patient, precise. Maribel began tracing her fingers along the symbols on the floor, chanting softly in a language Jacob could not understand. Celine sprinkled powders into a small brazier, the smoke curling in thick, aromatic spirals that made Jacob's head spin. Each breath drew him deeper into a fog of fascination and unease. He wanted to look away, but his gaze remained locked on the sisters. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time felt meaningless. Jacob felt a strange weight pressing on his chest, a mix of anticipation and dread. The sisters' ritual was subtle, almost hypnotic, shaping his thoughts and desires without overt force. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes that were both alluring and terrifying. Eager to understand that the Hollowborn sisters' power was not in brute force, it was in the slow, inexorable pull they exercised over those who came too close. As the ritual reached its peak, Jacob felt a shift within himself, a thrill mingled with fear, a dangerous awakening to sensations and thoughts he could neither name nor control. He realized with a sudden, dizzying clarity that the Hollowborn sisters' influence extended far beyond this room, beyond this night. They had drawn him in, not by threat, but by the promise of something forbidden yet irresistible. And as the candles flickered low, Jacob understood that leaving now would be impossible. He had crossed an invisible line, and the sisters' shadow had already claimed him. Next, we discover the forest's deeper secrets and the strange powers that the Hollowborn sisters wield beyond the walls of their home. Chapter 5. Secrets of the Hollowborn Forest. The forest surrounding the Hollowborn house was no ordinary stretch of trees. Even by day, it seemed alive, shifting subtly with every step Jacob took. Birds remained silent. The wind whispered unintelligible words, and the shadows of the ancient oaks seemed to stretch and curl unnaturally, as if watching him. Maribel and Celine led him along a narrow path, their presence simultaneously reassuring and unnerving. Jacob noticed carvings etched into the bark, symbols resembling those in the ritual room. Some were familiar, others entirely alien, yet all carried a sense of warning and power. The sisters moved with uncanny familiarity, guiding him past gnarled roots and through patches of thick moss. He stumbled at times, yet they never let him fall. It was as if the forest itself bent to their will, allowing no harm to reach those who were invited, but warning away the uninvited. Celine paused beside a small clearing, gesturing to a shallow pit lined with stones and covered with dried leaves. "This is where the forest remembers," she whispered. Jacob leaned in, peering at what appeared to be old bones, carefully arranged in patterns that mirrored the carvings on the trees. The air was thick with an earthy scent, mingled with something faintly sweet, almost intoxicating. Maribel explained that the Hollowborn sisters had long communicated with the forest, learning its rhythms and secrets. Their rituals, she said, were designed to honor and manipulate these hidden forces. Jacob shivered, torn between fascination and fear. The forest seemed to pulse under his feet, an invisible heartbeat syncing with his own. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch echoed unnervingly, amplifying the sisters' influence. He realized the danger. The sisters did not merely lure men. They bound them to the forest, to the house, to powers beyond comprehension. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows deepened, forming shapes that danced just beyond Jacob's vision. The sisters' eyes glimmered in the fading light, reflecting secrets he was only beginning to grasp. He wondered if escape was even possible, or if the forest itself would swallow him should he try. The Hollowborn sisters' power extended beyond walls and rituals. It lived in the woods, whispered through the wind, and watched from the darkness. Jacob felt the forest's pull, a constant reminder that he had entered a world from which ordinary men could not retreat. Next, we discover the men who had fallen before Jacob and the chilling lessons the sisters left behind for those who dared enter their realm.
Chapter 6. The Ghosts of Hollowborn. Hollow. Jacob's footsteps faltered as Maribel and Celine guided him deeper into the forest. He noticed faint traces of past visitors, discarded items, torn clothing, and the occasional boot print that abruptly ended as if swallowed by the earth itself. Each relic was a silent warning, an echo of men who had come before him and never returned. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he realized that he was walking among ghosts, memories embedded in the soil, whispered through the rustling leaves. Celine stopped beside a moss-covered boulder, kneeling to lift a fragment of parchment. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but Jacob could just make out crude sketches of men, faces twisted in confusion or ecstasy, scribbled with notes he could not fully understand. "They thought they could resist," Celine murmured, almost to herself. "But none truly do." Maribel's eyes glimmered, her fingers tracing the outline of the sketches. "Every man leaves a mark, every desire a trace. The forest remembers them all." Jacob felt a sudden weight pressing on his chest. These were not mere stories, they were warnings carved into the earth and etched into memory. The sisters' power was cumulative, feeding on each man who entered, strengthening with every encounter. Jacob could sense the subtle currents of energy in the air, like invisible threads linking the forest, the house, and the women. Each past victim seemed to whisper their fates, a soft, haunting chorus that urged him to turn back. Yet the sisters' presence was intoxicating. Maribel brushed a strand of hair from Jacob's forehead, her touch sending a strange warmth through him. Celine laughed softly, her voice mingling with the wind. Fear warred with fascination. He wanted to flee, yet every step toward the sisters drew him further into their world. The forest seemed alive with memories of Lou, Stutt's obsession, and despair. Jacob realized that the Hollowborn sisters' influence was not just physical, it was psychological, spiritual, and almost supernatural in scope. They shaped the desires of those around them, bending men's minds before the forest claimed their bodies. As the twilight deepened, shadows stretched long and warped. Jacob's heart pounded, awareness sharpening as he understood the depth of the danger he faced. The sisters were patient predators, and he was the latest prey drawn into their intricate, dark design. Next, we discover the first night of true terror in the Hollowborn home and the trials Jacob must face under the sisters' watchful eyes. Chapter 7. Nightfall in the Hollowborn house. Night had settled like a heavy veil over Hollowborn Hollow. Jacob returned to the house, his senses heightened by the forest's lingering whispers. Every step across the creaking floors felt amplified, as if the house itself was aware of his presence. Shadows moved along the walls, elongating unnaturally, and the faint scent of herbs mingled with something darker, something he could not name. Maribel and Celine greeted him with soft smiles, their eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight in ways that unsettled him. They did not speak of the forest or the previous victims. Instead, they guided him to a small chamber tucked at the back of the house. The room was sparsely furnished. A low bed, a single chair, and shelves lined with jars of herbs and mysterious powders. Yet even this simplicity felt deceptive, as though the room itself was a trap, designed to unbalance his mind. As Jacob settled in, the sisters began a ritual that would last long into the night. They circled him slowly, whispering words he could barely comprehend. The sound was melodic yet unnerving, a chant that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, forming shapes that both enticed and terrified him. Every instinct screamed to flee, but he remained frozen, caught between fascination and dread. Hours passed in a blur. Jacob felt his thoughts becoming foggy, reality bending around the rhythm of the sisters' movements. Maribel placed a hand lightly on his chest, and he felt a wave of vertigo, as if his mind and body no longer belonged solely to him. Celine's laughter rang softly in his ears, echoing off the walls, a haunting reminder that he was now entirely within their sphere of influence. The house itself seemed to respond to their will. Floorboards shifted subtly beneath him, candle flames flickered in, strange patterns, and the very air felt thick with unseen energy. Jacob realized that the Hollowborn sisters did not merely inhabit the house, they controlled it, bending its every element to amplify their power. By the time dawn's first light touched the horizon, Jacob was exhausted, both mentally and physically. He felt changed, as if a part of him had been left behind in the shadows of the chamber. The sisters watched him with knowing expressions, their influence subtle yet absolute. He understood then that his life, as he had known it, was over. He had become a participant in their world, bound by curiosity, fear, and a growing, undeniable fascination. Next, we discover Jacob's first encounter with the sisters' full power and the strange trials that will test his will and mind. Chapter 8. The Sisters' Power Unleashed. Jacob awoke to a house bathed in pale morning light, but the calm was deceptive. The Hollowborn sisters' presence lingered like a shadow over his very thoughts, and the events of the previous night had left him unsettled, though he could not pinpoint why. Maribel and Celine moved around him with silent precision, each gesture deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if the house itself responded to their will. "Today," Maribel said softly, "you will see what lies beyond mere curiosity." Her words carried weight, though her tone was gentle, almost comforting. Jacob nodded, unable to speak. The sisters guided him back to the ritual room, where the symbols on the floor seemed to glow faintly in the morning light. The air hummed, a subtle vibration that resonated through his bones, making him aware of the house's unseen energy. Celine began arranging objects on the floor, crystals, feathers, and jars filled with powders, whose scent was intoxicating yet unsettling. As she worked, Jacob felt an almost magnetic pull, a tugging at the very edges of his mind. The sisters' power was not overt. It was slow, insidious, wrapping around his thoughts, making him doubt what was real and what was imagined. Then Maribel stepped forward, her gaze locking onto Jacob's. He felt a wave of vertigo, a strange heat rising within him, as if his body was responding to the room, the sisters, and something else he could not see. Shadows along the walls twisted, forming shapes that resembled both human and animal figures, their eyes glinting in the flickering candlelight. Jacob tried to resist, but each attempt to pull away was met with a gentle nudge from the sisters, a whispered word, or a glance that rooted him in place. Fear and fascination warred within him, and he realized the depth of the Hollowborn sisters' control. They did not command through fire or thoughts, they commanded through desire, obsession, and the bending of perception itself. By evening, Jacob's sense of self felt fragile, stretched thin between curiosity and dread. He understood that he was no longer merely an observer. He was a participant, caught in the sisters' slow, deliberate weaving of influence. Every heartbeat, every breath seemed to pulse with their power. The forest outside, the house within, and the sisters themselves formed a network of unseen energy that ensnared him completely. Next, we discover the first full test of Jacob's will and the horrifying choices he must confront in the sisters' dark world.
Did you know long before ghost stories like your Hollowborn sisters narrative, Tennessee was already home to one of the most famous paranormal legends in American history, the Bell Witch haunting? Between 1817 and 1821, the Bell family of Robertson County, Tennessee reported unexplained phenomena at their farm near the Red River. Strange noises, knocking, and disembodied voices were said to torment the family, and local lore claims the spirit even physically interacted with them, especially with John Bell and his daughter Betsy. This entity became so well known that Martin V. Ingram published an authenticated history of the Bell Witch in 1894, one of the earliest written accounts of American supernatural folklore. Today, the story continues to capture imaginations, not necessarily as verified history, but as powerful 19th century folklore born from frontier life, belief, and mystery in Tennessee.
Chapter 9. The Trial of Desire and Fear. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting Hollowborn Hollow into a deep, suffocating darkness. Jacob felt the weight of the forest pressing in through the windows, the shadows reaching farther into the house than seemed possible. Maribel and Celine moved silently around him, their eyes gleaming with a knowing intent. Tonight was different. He could feel it. The sisters had planned something that would test him, strip him of certainty, and force him to confront desires he did not fully understand. They led him to the ritual chamber once more, the familiar symbols on the floor now glowing faintly under the flickering candlelight. The air smelled of damp earth and herbs, heavy and intoxicating. "You must decide," Maribel whispered, her voice carrying a strange melodic weight. "Will you resist, or will you embrace the path before you?" Her words seemed simple, yet their implications twisted his thoughts like smoke curling through the air. Selina produced a small mirror, its surface warped and dark, and handed it to Jacob. The moment he looked, the reflection staring back was not entirely his own. Shadows of men he had glimpsed in the forest, the lost, the vanished, appeared behind his image, their eyes filled with longing and despair. Jacob felt a tremor run through him, a mix of fear and fascination that rooted him to the spot. The sisters' power was subtle yet overwhelming. They did not command him to act. They allowed the reflection to ensnare his mind, forcing him to confront impulses and curiosities he had never admitted, even to himself. Every heartbeat felt magnified, every breath weighted with the tension of what might come next. The forest outside pulsed in rhythm with his fear, the house itself seeming to breathe, respond, and judge. Hours passed. Though Jacob could not measure them, he staggered between fascination and dread, each flicker of the candlelight twisting his perception. The sisters circled him, guiding without touching, whispering words he could almost understand. He felt trapped between reality and something far stranger, as though the Hollowborn sisters had blurred the line between the two entirely. By the end of the night, Jacob understood the truth. Resistance was a fragile illusion. The sisters' influence seeped into every part of him, reshaping thoughts, bending perception, and awakening desires he could neither name nor deny. He realized with a growing horror and fascination that his journey with the Hollowborn sisters had only begun, and that the trials ahead would stretch him far beyond the limits of reason. Next, we discover the dark history behind the Hollowborn sisters and the mysterious fate of those who dared oppose them. Chapter 10. Shadows of the Hollowborn Lineage. Jacob had survived his first full night under the sisters' subtle domination, but sleep offered no relief. His mind swirled with visions of the men who had come before him, their whispers echoing through the Hollowborn house and the surrounding forest. That morning, Maribel and Celine finally began to unveil the shadows behind their family name. The sisters led Jacob to a hidden library, a room he had never seen. Dusty tomes filled every shelf, their leather cracked with age, and strange symbols were scrawled along the spines. "Our family," Maribel began, "has walked these lands for generations. The Hollowborn line is older than the village itself. Our ancestors understood the forest, its rhythms, its whispers. They learned to shape desire and bend will, not by brute force but through knowledge, ritual, and patience." Celine gestured to a portrait of two women, ancestors bearing the same unnerving gaze as themselves. "These women," she said, "taught every generation that power lies not in domination, but in subtlety. Every man who entered our home, every soul drawn to the forest, became part of a long pattern. Some resisted, some succumbed. Few truly understood." Jacob shivered. He realized the Hollowborn sisters' influence was not a new phenomenon. It was a legacy, passed down and perfected over decades. The house, the forest, even the patterns etched into the trees, they were all tools of their family's craft. The sisters did not merely ensnare men, they refined a centuries-old practice of control, subtle manipulation, and irresistible allure. As he listened, Jacob felt a creeping sense of inevitability. The forest itself seemed to pulse with recognition, acknowledging the power of the Hollowborn lineage. The men who had vanished were not victims in the usual sense. They were threads woven into the sisters' tapestry of influence, a network of experience and obsession that Jacob now realized he could never truly escape. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the forest shadows stretched across the house, Jacob understood that he was facing far more than curiosity or danger. He was confronting a legacy of power, patience, and unyielding control. The Hollowborn sisters' dominion was not fleeting, it was eternal, nurtured by generations who had walked the same forest paths, performed the same rituals, and observed the same unwitting men succumb to the pull of desire and fear. Next, we discover how Jacob struggles with his growing entanglement and the first true test of loyalty to the Hollowborn sisters.
Chapter 11. The Test of Loyalty. The days blurred together in the Hollowborn house, each one drenched in shadow and subtle manipulation. Jacob had begun to feel the slow erosion of his old self. His thoughts were no longer entirely his own. Whispers of past victims mingled with the soft guidance of the sisters, forming a web he could barely perceive but could not resist. Maribel approached him one evening, holding a small, intricately carved wooden box. "Inside this," she said softly, "are choices that define who you truly are." Jacob hesitated, sensing the weight behind her words. Celine stood nearby, her eyes glinting with a quiet, commanding amusement. Together they presented him with objects from previous men who had entered the forest and never returned. A locket, a letter, a pocket watch, each a fragment of a life claimed by the sisters' influence. "You must choose," Maribel whispered, "to honor them, or to break away." The air thickened as Jacob reached for the first item. His fingers trembled. Each relic seemed to carry the lingering energy of its original owner, their desires, their fears, their surrender. The pull was irresistible, yet the thought of surrendering his own will terrified him. Celine circled him slowly, her laughter low and hypnotic. "There is no shame in following what is inevitable," she murmured, "but there is clarity in understanding it." Jacob realized the test was not merely about obedience. It was about acknowledgement of the power the sisters wielded, about recognizing that resistance might be futile. And yet choice was the illusion that bound him to humanity. Hours passed as he deliberated. Shadows on the walls shifted unnaturally, forming faint silhouettes of the men who had come before. Their eyes seemed to plead, warn, and beckon all at once. Jacob's heart pounded, his mind spun. Every instinct urged flight, yet every sensation screamed to remain, to yield just enough to understand, just enough to survive another night in the Hollowborn house. Finally, trembling and exhausted, Jacob made his choice. The sisters' faces softened into faint smiles, not of malice, but of approval, of understanding. He had acknowledged their legacy, the web of power they commanded, and in doing so, had taken the first step into fully accepting the dark rhythm of Hollowborn Hollow. Next, we discover the consequences of Jacob's choice and the terrifying deeper rituals that will test the very core of his mind and body. Chapter 12. The Depths of Ritual. The Hollowborn house seemed alive that night, the walls pulsing subtly with an energy Jacob could feel but not fully comprehend. Maribel and Celine guided him back into the ritual chamber, the familiar symbols glowing faintly under the candlelight. But tonight, the air was heavier, charged with anticipation, and the forest beyond whispered as though aware of what was about to unfold. "You are no longer merely a visitor," Maribel said softly. "You are part of our rhythm now, and every rhythm must be tested." Celine moved with silent grace, arranging objects on the floor, powders, herbs, feathers, and small trinkets from previous visitors, each imbued with memories of desire, fear, and surrender. Jacob felt a strange pull toward the items, as though unseen hands were guiding him, drawing his thoughts and will into a delicate, invisible web. The sisters began their ritual in earnest. They did not speak commands. Their power was subtler, a slow persuasion that wrapped around Jacob's senses. Shadows twisted along the walls, elongating and bending unnaturally. Candle flames flickered, and the symbols on the floor seemed to hum faintly in resonance with his heartbeat. Every breath Jacob took felt magnified, every sound amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, even the soft, hypnotic laughter of Celine. Maribel reached out, tracing lines along Jacob's arms, a gentle touch that sent shivers of anticipation and dread through him. Celine moved behind him, whispering words he almost understood, phrases that seemed designed to unravel and rebuild his perception of reality. Hours passed in this suspended tension, a slow dance between fear and fascination. Jacob's mind was both clear and clouded, caught in a liminal state where every impulse felt simultaneously his own, and yet dictated by the sister's will. By dawn, Jacob realized he had undergone a subtle transformation. His instincts, thoughts, and desires were no longer entirely independent. He could feel the forest, the house, and the Hollowborn sisters' influence pulsing through him. Yet a part of him remained aware, a small, fragile shard of resistance that whispered he could still leave, if he dared. The ritual was not merely a test. It was a forging, a slow shaping of Jacob into something the sisters could bend fully to their purpose. And as the morning light touched the chamber, the forest outside seemed to nod, acknowledging the new thread woven into the Hollowborn web. Next, we discover Jacob's first true confrontation with the sisters' dark history and the chilling fate of those who tried to resist. Chapter 13. Echoes of the Lost. Jacob wandered the Hollowborn house that evening, the weight of his choices pressing heavily on him. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper of wind carrying the voices of men who had walked these halls before him. He had begun to sense the full scope of the sisters' power, an influence that extended far beyond the walls into the very forest, and deep into the minds of those who entered. Maribel guided him to a hidden chamber, concealed behind a bookshelf in the library. The room was dimly lit by a single candle, revealing shelves lined with journals and personal belongings, items from men who had vanished over decades. Jacob's eyes widened in horror as he recognized names he had heard whispered in the village. Farmers, merchants, travelers. Their journals detailed encounters with the sisters, curiosity, desire, terror, and ultimately surrender. None had left intact. Some had vanished entirely, while others were said to return in fractured states, their minds warped by what they had witnessed. Celine handed him a journal, its pages yellowed with age. Jacob flipped through it, reading accounts of the subtle manipulations the sisters wielded. Men described nights where reality seemed to bend, where desires they never admitted to themselves consumed them. They spoke of the forest responding to the sisters' will, shadows moving, and the air thick with intoxicating scents. Many tried to resist, but all eventually succumbed to a pull far greater than mere human persuasion. Jacob's heart pounded. He realized that he had been lured into a legacy of control, desire, and obsession that had claimed countless souls before him. The Hollowborn sisters' power was not a mere curiosity. It was a slow, relentless force that left no room for escape once a man had truly stepped into their world. As he closed the journal, a shiver ran down his spine. The sisters watched him silently from the doorway, their presence calm yet commanding. Jacob understood with growing dread that the forest and the house were not simply homes. They were instruments of the sisters' control, alive with centuries of accumulated influence. Every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat of the men who had come before pulsed invisibly through the walls, guiding, observing, and shaping those who followed. By nightfall, Jacob knew that resistance was not just difficult, it was almost impossible. Yet somewhere deep within, a fragile spark of his old self whispered that escape might still exist, if only he could understand the forest and the Hollowborn sisters' patterns well enough. But the cost of curiosity and defiance was already written into the shadows that stretched across the chamber. Next, we discover how Jacob faces a final test that will push his mind and will to the edge, confronting both desire and terror. Chapter 14. The Ultimate Trial. The night air in Hollowborn Hollow was thick and still, carrying whispers that seemed almost alive. Jacob could feel the pulse of the forest through the floorboards of the house, a slow, steady rhythm that mirrored his own rising anxiety. Maribel and Celine had summoned him to the ritual chamber once more, their faces calm, eyes gleaming with the same quiet authority that had entranced him from the very first day. "You have come far," Maribel said softly, her voice smooth like silk, yet weighted with consequence. "But tonight, you will see the extent of what it means to step fully into our world." Celine moved beside her, holding a shallow bowl filled with water so dark it reflected nothing but shadows. "Look into it," she whispered. "See yourself, and what you could become." Jacob knelt before the bowl, and the reflections that stared back were not entirely his own. He saw himself twisted by desire and fear, caught between fascination and terror, his mind stretched thin by the subtle influence of the Hollowborn sisters. Around the edges of the water, shadows coalesced into faint forms. The men who had come before him, their expressions a mixture of longing, despair, and acceptance. Maribel circled him slowly, her hand brushing against his shoulder. Every nerve in his body thrummed with anticipation and dread. Celine's whispers grew louder, melodic and insistent, guiding his attention to the shadows, then to the candlelight, then back to the water. The forest outside seemed to press closer, the trees bending subtly toward the house, as if observing this trial with judgment. Hours passed, though Jacob could not measure them. The water reflected not only the past but possible futures, visions of surrender or defiance, of freedom or eternal entanglement. Every choice seemed both inevitable and impossible. The sisters did not force hate him. They only revealed, showed him the delicate web of power, desire and fear into which he had stepped. By dawn, Jacob understood that the trial was not meant to break him outright. It was designed to reshape him, to align his mind and body with the rhythm of Hollowborn Hollow. The sisters had tested his curiosity, his fear, his desire, and his will. And while he had survived, he knew that he was no longer merely a man wandering the forest. He had become part of the legacy, another thread in the intricate web the sisters wove across decades and generations. Next, we discover the final revelation of the Hollowborn sisters' dominion and the fate that awaits Jacob in their dark world. Chapter 15. The Sisters' Dominion. Jacob had crossed every threshold the Hollowborn sisters had laid before him. Each night, each ritual, each subtle manipulation had drawn him deeper into their world. Yet nothing prepared him for the truth that unfolded as Maribel and Celine finally revealed the full extent of their dominion. The sisters led him through the house to a room he had never seen, a grand chamber hidden behind heavy curtains, filled with mirrors that reflected not only his image, but the forest outside, distorted and alive. The walls seemed to breathe, shadows shifting as though aware of his presence. Maribel spoke softly, almost reverently. "This is Hollowborn Hollow itself. Every wall, every tree, every echo you have felt is part of our control. We shape it. It shapes you. And every man who enters, willingly or not, becomes part of this legacy." Celine gestured to the mirrors, which shimmered like dark water. Within them, Jacob saw glimpses of past victims, not broken, but transformed, merged with the forest and the house, their essences entwined with the Hollowborn power. Fear and fascination warred within him. He realized that surrender was not simply obedience. It was integration, a blending of mind, body and soul with the sisters' influence. Maribel's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "You have chosen curiosity over caution. You have faced fear and desire in equal measure. Now you must accept what it means to truly belong here, or remain forever on the edge, watching shadows that will consume you if you resist." The words were gentle, yet their weight pressed upon him like the forest itself. Jacob felt the house, the forest, and the sisters' presence merging into a singular pulse that resonated within him. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought was now subtly entwined with the Hollowborn rhythm. Resistance felt futile, yet he could cede, as the fragile spark of his old self still flickering, tiny but persistent. The realization struck him with a mixture of awe and terror. The Hollowborn sisters' dominion was not fleeting. It was enduring, eternal, and meticulously cultivated over generations. Every man who entered their world was drawn into a pattern, a web that shaped not only their present, but their essence, their very being. And Jacob understood, with an icy clarity, that stepping fully into their realm meant a transformation that could never be undone. Next, we discover the final night of revelation and the ultimate fate that awaits Jacob in the Hollowborn sisters' dark and irresistible world. Chapter 16. Eternal Shadows of Hollowborn Hollow. The forest outside was silent, almost reverent, as Jacob entered the ritual chamber one last time. The Hollowborn sisters stood waiting, their eyes calm, yet brimming with the quiet authority that had entranced him from the beginning. The house itself seemed alive, its very walls pulsing with centuries of accumulated power and secrets. Jacob could feel it, the heartbeat of the Hollowborn Hollow, intertwined with his own, inseparable now. Maribel spoke first, her voice soft but unwavering. "You have come to the edge, Jacob. You have seen the past, confronted desire, faced fear, and walked among shadows. Tonight, you decide. Will you remain tethered to the world you knew, or will you fully embrace what lies beyond?" Celine stepped closer, holding a small bowl of dark water. "Look into it," she whispered. Jacob peered in, and the reflection was not merely himself. It was a combination of every man who had entered the Hollowborn world before him. Their forms shimmered and twisted, blending with shadows and forest shapes. He saw glimpses of lives claimed, desires bent, and minds reshaped. The truth settled like cold iron in his chest. The Hollowborn sisters' power was absolute, eternal, and inescapable once truly encountered. Jacob's mind struggled, wavering between resistance and surrender. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every sensation pulled him closer, an intoxicating mix of fear, fascination, and the thrill of the forbidden. The forest outside seemed to lean in, the shadows in the mirrors stretching as if beckoning him into an eternity entwined with the sisters' rhythm. Maribel's hand touched his shoulder lightly, a gesture both comforting and commanding. "To resist fully," she said, "is to vanish like those before you. To embrace is to live within the hollow of time, connected, transformed, and remembered." Celine's laughter, melodic yet haunting, filled the chamber, wrapping around Jacob's thoughts and blurring the line between choice and inevitability. The candle flames flickered, the symbols on the floor pulsed faintly, and Jacob felt the slow merging of himself with the Hollowborn legacy. The forest, the house, the sisters. They were no longer external. They were part of him, and he part of them. His fear, desire, and curiosity intertwined in a rhythm that could never be broken. As dawn approached, Jacob realized he had crossed the final threshold. His old life, his freedom, and his certainty were gone. Yet in their place was a strange clarity. He belonged, he was remembered, and he was now an eternal thread in the shadowed tapestry of Hollowborn Hollow. The Hollowborn sisters watched, silent and serene, as the forest pulsed around them, guardians of desire, fear, and irresistible power that had claimed countless souls and would continue to do so. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, Jacob understood one unshakable truth. Some curiosities were never meant to be resisted the end.